Hi, so for my first film vlog and for the week of Silent Era, I decided to watch and review the film Stella Maris 1918. The film was directed by Marshall Nealon and stars Mary Pickford and Conway Turrell in a very interesting story about two very different characters. The first of these is Stella Maris, a very elegant but also disabled and bedridden woman who's basically trapped in a world created by her two guardians, in which she thinks that everything is well outside of her room and that the world is at peace and that everyone is happy, when that's not really true, and the world is actually in a war at that present time. The second character is actually also played by the same actress, Mary Pickford, and that is Unity Blake. The very interesting thing is that she's an extremely different character. She's an orphan child, she's uneducated, and she has very different mannerisms from Stella Maris. Now, John Riska becomes the later love interest of both of these characters, and some very interesting situations, including one that even comes to life and death, ensue as the film progresses. A few very notable things about this film are, first of all, the color grading that was introduced with film tinting. And so one thing that I noticed as I was watching is that the scenes in the beginning with Unity Blake, the orphan girl, are always in just an untinted black and white scene, whereas the film scenes with Stella Maris were, on the contrast, tinted a slight orange to represent more of a warm or happy feeling. As the film progresses, those normal standards do change because the plot gets a little bit more convoluted, and Stella Maris, the warm, fuzzy character, and then the unconventional Unity Blake come together in an interesting and unusual mesh. Now, another thing about this film is that with silent films, it was very common for actors to sort of over-exaggerate their facial expressions and hand motions to the point where it was a little bit unrealistic and feels out of touch, especially watching from a perspective of someone who's primarily seen films with voice actors, with sound. But this film didn't fail that approach and actually has very realistic expressions in that sense. Now, another element that I think was very important to the film was how they presented the characters with their dress and with the production design. There was a very important element of separating Mary Pickford's two characters, Stella Maris and Unity Blake, because obviously these are two very different people and it needs to be very clear that it's not the same character. So we have Unity Blake in scrap clothing with a hunch. She pulls into her shirt a lot of the time. And then on the other hand, you have the elegant Stella Maris. She's usually in an all-white dress that's very lacy, very fluttery, and it definitely helps to see the different characters follow different types of styles of clothing, and that's an element that I think definitely adds to differentiating the character at a time where that wasn't necessarily the standard. It was just beginning to be done with the dual character role with one actor. As I mentioned before, the film did take place right as we came to the end of the Great War, or World War I. And so I think it was very interesting to see a film that, sort of discusses this contrast between, our expectations of the world and how the world really is, and how Stella Maris was very much trapped in that, fake reality that her guardians, created for her, that everything was perfect. And when she really started to see the world as it was a shock to her, and it came, as a big surprise. And so I think that it's very interesting that came, at a time of war when everyone's thinking about how distressed the world is, and to imagine a character who's living in that sort of fantasy land is very important to creating this sort of differentiation from how things are in the real world, and we're exposed to so much, whereas this character, Stella Maris, she didn't have that exposure. One cool thing that I really like about this film, and that was also actually very representative in Mary Pickford's other films as an actress, is that it did have a lot of female leading characters. The plot was definitely driven primarily by Stella Maris' character and the other secondary female character in the film, whereas the male characters, including John Riska, were more of a supporting element to help push the plot that was already going and help contribute to the narrative, but not necessarily to lead it. And one thing that many scholars and critics have noted is that this film is one of the earlier ones to pass the Bechdel test, and have, you know, those two female characters, and to have a conversation between the two, where they're not talking just about men. And so, and actually another thing that they did note was that it did not pass the reverse Bechdel test with two male characters talking about something other than women, which I thought was a little bit funny. But it is interesting and actually really great to see a film that has a good amount of representation in that sense. And so that's something that was kind of enlightening to see after watching a couple of other silent films that definitely had a majority male or all male cast. Ultimately, I think this film does pass the test of time, and it includes a lot of interesting technical characteristics, like the dual role with two of the same actor in one scene edited together. And this is coming at a time when that sort of technology was just being perfected. But there were a lot of elements and story narrative elements that were implemented that were very new and seemed to be very much mastered at the time. I think that there's a lot that modern filmmakers can actually learn from a film like this, and seeing just how developed film was. It's really interesting when you think of silent films. You don't think of these super developed, complex stories, but I think that Stella Maris definitely achieved what it was going for, and getting across the message of, you know, working for what you want and working for what's right, and, you know, taking responsibility for your actions, and you know, helping people out. It's definitely a message. It's definitely a positive message about working for other people, and making sure that the world is a better place when you leave the world.